Okay, so in this video we're just going to go over the construction script and how it can help you create a level or block out a level pretty easily using some various tools. Now I'm going to create a blueprint here in my project. It's just going to be a simple actor and we'll just call it construction script. And I just want to go over some of the basics of this and why it's different from using your event graph. So in a blueprint, you've got three main tabs when you open it. You've got your viewport, you've got your construction script, and you've got your event graph. Your event graph fires off whenever you press play, okay? So your event graph is in working order, or is running, I suppose is a better way of putting it, at run time, okay? So when you press the play button, your event graph is running. Before that though, in the editor, the construction script is running, okay? And this means that you can use code to kind of help you build levels and kind of use procedurally generated items to kind of quickly build content inside the editor before you press play. So for instance, if I was to add a light component to this, so point light, pull this out and then change the color of it. So I'm just going to set the light color. What I can do is I can split this color into its kind of four different segments of red, green, blue and alpha, and I can just get a random float in range for each one of these. That is minimum going to be 0 and maximum going to be 1. If I place this in my level, you'll notice in the editor the color hasn't changed. It's always going to be its default color. If I press play though, it will change randomly. So every time I press play, it should be a different color. But what a construction script does, so if I just cut that, paste it into my construction script, what it does though is if I move my light now in the editor, it will be consistently changing the light color, and you can see that it's firing off there, okay, as I'm moving my light. So that's the difference between an event graph and a construction script. The construction script runs in the editor and the event graph runs when you press play. And there's some cool things that we can do with that. So chiefly, one of the main ones is be able to create geometry on the fly in your editor. And I'm going to show you a quick way of doing that. So if I go to add component, I'm going to add in a component which is called an instance static mesh. We'll just call this cube. And what we want to do is we want to use what's called a for loop to generate our content. Basically this for loop, if I have two numbers in the first and last index, it will determine how many times this fires off, okay? And it happens instantaneously. It doesn't just wait for, you know, a delay or anything like that. It will just loop these and then it'll carry on running with whatever it's meant to be doing. So what we can do is we can determine how often this loops on like a positional data, for instance. So if I create two variables, one called location, and I'll change that to a vector, and the other will be size, just because we need to know the size of our cube for this. I'm going to make them both public. Our size I'm going to change to a float. And on our location I'm also going to expose the 3D widget, which I'll show you what it does in a second. So I'm going to grab my location and I'm going to split that. And first of all, I'm only going to run this for the X, okay? So what I want to do is I want to get the X value, okay, for whenever I move this 3D widget, and I want to divide it by the size of my cube. Now I know the cube that I'm going to be using is going to be a size of 100 on each side. Now, the division on this may lead to some decimal points or whatever, so what we want to do is we want to truncate this, which means it's just going to round it off to the nearest number. So we don't have any decimal points going in here. And what we're going to do is we're going to get our cube, which is an instance mesh, and we're going to add an instance. And we're going to split this, and we're going to split the location. And what we're going to do is we're going to add it in the location by getting the number, okay, of that cube. So it could be the first, second, or third. And we're going to multiply it by the size of our cube. So the first one will be like 100 units across, and then the second one will be placed 200 units across, and the third one will be placed 300 units across. And this is all happening on the X. Okay, so nothing's going to happen on the Y or the Z just yet. For our cube, I'm just going to go in the meshes folder here, and I'm going to drag in that cube. Compile, save. So if I drag this into my scene now, this construction script, I forgot I've got my light still attached. I'm just going to delete that. You can see very faintly it's got the word location because I've made that 3D widget, but if you might be able to see here, but if I click in here, I've basically clicked not on the origin or the actual blueprint itself, but that 3D widget, which is this location. And if I move it across in the X, once that gets to 100 or 200, it's going to add in an extra mesh. To make it easier, I can use my snap tool up here and set it to 100, so I know every time I move this, it's going to add one. But you also notice that it's not going to add anything for the Z or the Y. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back into this. We're just going to disconnect these for now. And we've got the script run for the X. To make it run for the Y and the Z, it's just going to be exactly the same, so we're going to copy and paste it. I say exactly the same, but minor differences. And here where it's gotten the location for the X, we want to do the Y next, so we're just going to plug in the Y. And here where it's got X again, we're just going to plug in the Z. So it's going to take the location value for Z, plug that in. And then what we're going to do is we're going to plug in or add instance at the very end. And since this is the Z goes in here. Since this is the Y goes in here. And this is the X goes in here. And this is where you might want to use rewrite nodes, just to kind of generally tidy up your script, make it easier to read. Compile, save that. And now if I grab this location, move it up, you can see that it's adding in my Z. And then if I get the Y, pull it out, it's adding in my Y. So that's a good way then of kind of blocking out your level, because really all you have to do is just pull this one node and it'll be able to set your walls or floors into any sizes that you want. Another cool feature is kind of using spline mesh to kind of make, I suppose, more complicated shapes inside UE4. For this to work though, you really have to have a mesh that has enough geometry to support what you're doing. And I'm going to show you quickly in Maya what I did to set up and create a small pipe. So I've got this pipe model that I've made in Maya, which is really simple. But basically to make that in Maya, all I did was click on the cylinder icon here in the top left hand corner and basically resize that . So once you've got that sized up, what you want to do is click on this icon here. And what we can do is we can add subdivisions into it by height. So you probably want to add in 20 there by height. And the more subdivisions you have, when we kind of bend this pipe inside Maya or inside UE4, the smoother that bend's going to be. So if I put it up to 30, it will be a lot smoother. And the only other thing that I did was I kind of extruded these end parts just so that we could easily see the multiple pipe objects in our spline tool when we create it. So I'm just going to grab the polygons here at the top, making sure I don't get any at the very top, and do the same for the bottom. And then hit this extrude button here, and then I just want to change the thickness, okay, to something like 15. Press enter. I may have gotten a few extra polygons there, but that should be okay. So once you've done that, I just went File, Export Selection, and then I just export it as an FBX. Make sure that the geometry has smoothing groups, smooth mesh, triangulate, and reference assets on it. I'm not going to save this here one because it's pretty much the same as the last one. And then in Unreal, I just dragged and dropped it into my scene. Okay, and that was it. That's all I have to do for the 3D mesh. So we're going to make a new blueprint class for this. So actor, and we'll call it pipe BP. Open that up. What we want to do is we want to add in what's called a spline. Okay, so a spline is kind of like a 3D line that you can add points to. Okay, so I can add points to this here, and I can move these points. Oh, I've got my snap tool on. In a 3D space. You also notice that it comes with these kind of tangents, they're called, and these allow me to kind of dictate the level of curve that I'm achieving on the spline as well. I'm going to leave it on its default though. And what I mean by default is it's a spline that has 2 points. The one thing I am going to do though is I'm going to drag this here onto the scene root. I'm going to make the spline the scene root. In our construction script, we are going to create a for loop. For loop. Index 0. And this last index is going to be driven by the amount of points that we have in our spline, because when we take it into our editor, we're going to add more points to it then. So we're going to get our spline. We're going to get number of spline points. And then what we're going to do is actually -2 off there, because by default our spline has 2 points. And we don't want to use those in our for loop. Next thing, we're going to add a spline mesh component. We're going to set a static mesh from this. And because we kind of want to leave this blueprint open, we're not going to select a static mesh here. What we're going to do is we're going to promote this to a variable. Okay, we're going to call this mesh, and we're going to keep it public so we can actually drag and drop in different meshes as we go along. Next thing that we're going to do is, for this here, we're going to set the forward axis. I'm going to have to pull out from this return value. So I'm going to set the forward axis. And the reason we're doing this is because we can use multiple meshes in this. The forward axis for that, or for those meshes, might be all different. So we want to make this here public, or we want to make it into a public variable. So call it axis. So whenever we change the mesh, we can change the axis for it as well. Next, we want to attach this to a component. I'm going to pull out from this target again. And you'll probably end up with two here. What you want to do is hover over them, and you want to use the one that says for scene component. Okay, so the top one here is for target as actor, and here is target as scene component, so we're going to use that one. And the parent for this is going to be the spline. Then we're going to pull out this here node again, and we're going to set start and end. And we're going to do this by using the spline and the spline points. So if we go back to our spline, or the for loop, what we're going to do is pull out the spline, type in tangent, and we're going to get tangent at spline point. We're also going to type or pull out from the spline, type in location. We're going to get the location at spline point. So whenever this is looping, we're going to use this index and go, okay, if it's the first point, okay, after we've minus the 2, we want to get that location. And we also want to get the tangent from that spline. And remember, the tangent is the kind of curve that you have on your spline. But we've also got an endpoint over here and an end tangent. So what we want to do is duplicate these two. And with our index, we're going to add one. So the endpoint and the end tangent are going to come from the next point. Okay, that's been added on. So our top location, is going to go into our start position. Our tangent here is going to go into our start tangent. Our get location, the next one's going to be our end position, and the last tangent is going to be our end tangent. And the last thing that we want to do is we want to make sure that there's collision on this so we can kind of walk on it and things like that there. So we're going to go set collision enabled, and the target again is going to be our spline mesh component. Compile and save that. So now whenever we take this pipe BP in, you can see that we've got our spline there with the 2 points. By default here as well, we've got those exposed variables of the mesh and the axis. So I've got my pipe here, I'm going to plug it into my mesh, and we want our pipe going from left to right, but now it's going from top to bottom. So I'm going to have to change my axis to Z. You can see now it fits in there. If I grab this last point and pull it out, it's changing that end position. Okay. What I can also do is right click in here, add a spline point, and now I've got 2 pipes that are connected together. I can kind of move this about and it'll bend. You can add in really nice details this way. I can grab this here and change the curvature of it and get something really nice. As I was saying before, you really do need a lot of geometry. Well, not a lot of geometry, some geometry to make this work better. And one of the things to kind of show that off is I've got meshes here. I've got my kind of wood block, so I'll plug that in instead. I might have to change the axis. So if I scale this out, you can see that it's actually not curving or anything. It's just going up and down just because it doesn't have doesn't have any geometry to make it move. I can still add in more. So now I've got 3. And if I place this down the ground, press play, I should be able to walk over it. So that's how you can kind of use spline meshes. Oh, I did forget to set the collision type to collision enable query in physics. So you can see I'm walking off it now. So that's an easy way of making spline meshes to kind of add detail into your scene. The last thing is, it's not really to do with construction scripts, but it's more to do with splines and how to use them to make platforms and elevators and such. So what I'm going to do is make another blueprint. I'll call this moving platform. Open that up. Add a spline in again. Go to my event graph, and I'm actually going to have to make a box component here as well. What I want to have happen is when I walk into this box, it's going to set off a platform moving across the spline. So get my onComponent begin overlap. I'm going to make a timeline, and I'll call it platform. So whenever I walk into it, it's going to play it. This timeline is just going to contain a float track. So at 0, 0, float track, and then at 5 seconds, we just want that to go to 1. What this is going to do is going to set the relative location of our cube, which we haven't added. So set relative location. And the location for that is going to be driven by our track and the points on our spline. So we're going to get the spline length. And we're going to get location at distance along spline. And that's going to plug into new location. And what we're going to do is we're going to multiply our spline length by our track and plug that into distance. Compile and save that. So if I drag my platform in here and pull out our spline, add in some points, and then I'm just going to grab the box that I have to move over. Just going to put that on top of the box that I'm going to be standing on, and then move that down to the ground. So whenever I walk on this, it should start moving the platform. There we go. And it's just going to follow along that spline. So that's a quick way of making platforms. You can make elevators out of that. You can actually make it run and loop that timeline so it doesn't have to be activated by walking out of the box. So you just have a platform going left and right. And it's just really easy to come in, edit splines. So if that there doesn't work, all you have to do is click on it, change the location of the spline points, or add new spline points, that type of thing.